So I learned some new stuff today, which I'm kind of glad I did. Or actually, no, learned some new stuff this week, which is kind of good. There is a quote that I really love that actually came from, that was written in 1888 by the German philosopher. I will butcher his name, Friedrich Nietzsche, but Nietzsche, what is it? Nietzsche. See, I told you I was going to butcher it completely. And what the quote is that which does not kill me makes me stronger. And until this week, I would have told you that Kanye West said it first. And some would argue it was Kelly Clarkson or whatever, and some of you are wondering, what in the world are you even talking about? Those of you who are about 35 and younger understand that quote. Everybody else, don't worry about it. But I loved that song as a kid. Do not listen to it. And I remember when I was in high school, it was big. And I used to listen to that song before I would go kill myself in a workout. And it was funny. I remember the example being set in a workout session my freshman year. We had this thing called off season, which was kind of torture season. And we had this exercise routine we would call a circuit. And I remember we're doing this circuit workout. If any of you have ever been to the gym, you know what a circuit machine is. But basically it's these machines that you work out on. And this kid, his name was Corey Miller. He's probably not even listening to this and never will. But I remember he's working out, and then we hear this loud crash. He had worked out so hard, he has passed out on the machine and fallen off of the machine. And what we were told at that point is that's the level you need to work if you're going to be good, and that's how you're going to win championships. And so I took that to mean I'm going to kill myself before we get done with this. And it would lead me to working out like super, super hard. Now, not to the point where I'm ready to collapse off of a circuit machine, okay? That's a little extreme. But that was kind of the mentality that was brought in us, is that what does not kill you can only make you stronger. And I wonder, if we think about life and we think about growth and everything else, sometimes that reigns true, right? It's funny. So one thing we're dealing with in the Dalton household, and I was debating even talking about this, but I'm going to. Judah's starting to walk now, and it looks like the kid has been in fistfights all week. I mean, he's got a black eye right now. He's got a bump on his head, and what I'm realizing, and maybe this is true whenever I was walking, I don't remember, but they fall down a lot. Last night, we were in there watching TV, and the next thing I know, he's face planting into his bouncer. And then I'm like, Camille, he's got a black eye. And she's like, he'll live. She's much more comfortable in these things than I am. But I think it's super cute that he's learning to walk, but could you imagine if he never learned how to walk? Could you imagine if he never took the time and he never fell down, or if he fell down, he never got back up? And so I think about this in growth, and what doesn't kill you can only make you stronger, is that if he does not fall down, he probably will not walk really well, right? Because how do we learn to walk? By falling. Here's a better question. How did you ever learn how to ride a bike? By falling off the bike and then learning not how to fall off the bike, right? That's how I learned. And so I think there's so many things in our life that what does not kill us can only make us stronger and get us to the growth and the next transition that we need to be at. And so as we're thinking about this, I want us to think about a text I preached on a couple weeks ago, so we're not going to really stay there, but I do want to talk about it. We talked about, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, we talked about the parable of the sower. in Matthew chapter 13. And as you remember, a farmer is going out and scattering seeds. As we talked about, there is the one who is throwing seeds, and it seems to me he doesn't even care where he throws the seeds. Not necessarily the best farming strategy in the world, but that's what he's doing. It just says we do what? We sow seeds. Y'all remember that now. And so then he's talking about throwing seeds. And then the other thing that we could talk about in that text would be the soil things. And what do I mean by that? Is that each one of us is in a different place in soil, and there are beautiful things that God does to work in us to fix the soil, right? And I love soil things, and I don't believe that when God calls us, He leaves us in the same soil, which is more in line with what we're going to talk about. But realistically, now, minus this farmer, because I think we can argue he may not have a lot of experience on right farming techniques, so to speak. But do you think, for just a moment, that there is training of some kind that has to happen before you become a farmer? Ryan is looking at me and saying no. I'm just kidding. I mean, do you think, for just a moment, that Ryan right now would let me go get into a tractor by myself, nobody there, and start doing tractor things? Probably not. Because, I can't even tell you what all you do in a tractor other than till and cut grass. Is that it? No. And so there has to be then at least some level of training before you ever become a farmer, right? I'm sure at the Franzoy Farms, I'm sorry I pick on you, you're the only real farmer I know. I'm sure at Franzoy Farms, you don't just pick somebody up off the street and give them no instruction and just say, go work. No, there's some instruction and there's some training that has to happen, right? And I wonder, and I just wonder, is it possible that good farmers need good training and good experience? And how do we get experience and training? Well, it's walking and falling down, right? And so what I want us to do this morning is I want us to take a look at a man who had to do a lot of growing before he could step into the calling and the position in which God had called him to. So if you have your Bibles, turn with me over to Genesis chapter 37. Again, that's Genesis chapter 37. We're going to be looking at verses 1 through 11. Again, that's Genesis chapter 37, verses 1 through 11. So Genesis chapter 37, starting in verse 1, it says this: Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. And so this is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the son of Bilhah, and the sons of Zipporah. His father's wives, and he had brought their father a bad report about them. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made him an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. And Joseph had a dream. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to the dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright while your sheaves gathered all around mine and bowed down to it." That's really going to make you loved and liked. His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen, I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." And when he told his father as well as his fathers rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his fathers kept this matter in mind. So, Joseph is Jacob's favorite son. And here's why. Joseph is the child that was born from Rachel. This is the wife that Jacob had that he loved. There was Rachel and Leah, and Jacob loved Rachel. He wanted to be with Rachel, and so. But the problem with Rachel is because he loved her so much, and the Bible would tell us that he didn't really love Leah, that Rachel was barren. But eventually, God opened her womb, and she was able to become pregnant and conceive, and she bore him Joseph. And so Joseph was automatically the favorite because Joseph was the child, really was the child he always wanted. Isn't that weird to think about? That Joseph was the one that he always wanted, that he could never have, but finally it was here. And so Joseph was Jacob's favorite son. And how do you show somebody their favorite son, that they're your favorite child? I believe, I heard a story about Deion Sanders. He does power rankings. And I thought maybe I'll do that for my kids. They can move up each week. But how Jacob showed it was he gave him a jacket. And it was a colorful jacket. I mean, it was so bright and loud. I mean, they say ornate robe, but he gave him a jacket. And the other kids were probably watching this. "Here, you're my favorite." And that made him really popular amongst his siblings, right? Actually, no, the Bible tells us that his siblings hated him. They were extremely jealous of Joseph. But Joseph had another problem. He might have been a little arrogant. Just a little bit. And not just that, he was also a dreamer. And the Bible tells us that God gives Joseph a dream that that he is a sheep and his sheep was standing upright, and the other 11 kids, they were other sheaves, but all of them started bowing down to him. And that made his brothers love him even more, right? But no, what happened then is they were so upset. "So you mean we're going to bow down to you?" And this made them a little bit more angry. And then Joseph had another dream. And then the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to him. And then he tells that to his father, and his father is telling me, so now you're saying that I'm going to bow down to you, and your mother and everybody else is going to bow down to you? And now the kids hated him even more, but it's interesting that Jacob kept this in mind, and he pondered, what does this mean? What could this mean? But what I love about this text the most is God gave Joseph the vision, right? God gave Joseph the vision of where God would lead him to. In other words, God gave Joseph the destination, but he left out the journey. Because realistically, Joseph was not ready for the call. God gave him the call and told him, this is where you will be. but there's going to be things that are going to happen along the way. And Joseph loved the idea probably of being used and having status and being loved and being in leadership and things like that. That's why I think he might have been a little arrogant, just a little bit. And he loved the idea of the status and the position, but he had no idea of the fire that was to come along the way. How could he know? How could he know that this position and this status would lead him to being beaten up, and the brothers are debating if we should kill him, and eventually we're going to sell him into slavery? Could you imagine your own family throwing you into a pit or a cistern and leaving them there for dead, and then all of a sudden being sold into slavery, and then you're going to Potiphar's house, which is this great status, and the Bible would tell us that God is with Joseph in Potiphar's house, and in Potiphar's house he's doing great. He's thriving, but there's an issue with Potiphar's wife, and Potiphar ends up trying to take Joseph, and Joseph runs away out naked because she's got his jacket, and see what he did to me. And then what happens? Well, Joseph is thrown into an even deeper pit. He's thrown into prison. This is a man who probably at that point, actually at all of these points, are thinking, God has given me this vision, but how can it be? Because I've spit now twice in, number one, a cistern, and now I'm in prison, and I'm in a pit, and I'm over here next to a baker and a cupbearer, and they're having dreams, and I guess I'm going to tell them the dream, but God is with me, and I'm glad God is keeping me safe. But I never thought in my life I would be in prison. Do you think Joseph thought he would end up in prison? Do you think Joseph thought in his life that he was going to be sold into slavery? But the Bible tells us God is with Joseph. And while he's in prison, the baker and the cupbearer both start having dreams, and they tell him, and he tells them, hey, one of you, you're going to die, but the other one, you're going to be restored. But when you are restored, remember me. Do you think he remembers? No. And so he's left in prison waiting for his safety for them to come get him out. And yet Joseph is in the pit. And then eventually Pharaoh starts having these dreams. And then they remember Joseph, the one who told them the dreams and all of this. And Joseph is brought out. But let's be realistic here. Joseph had to spend a lot of time in the pit. He had to spend time in slavery. He had to spend time in Potiphar's house. He had to spend time with false accusations. He had to spend time in prison. He had to spend time learning how to trust God even when it doesn't make any sense. And so I wonder what does that mean for us? Because the day did come where Joseph would save Egypt, and the bowing down and the sheaves and all of that made sense in the end, but God had to crush Joseph just a bit. He had to chisel off just a bit of the flaws. He had to chisel off the arrogance. He had to chisel off his reliance on himself. He had to chisel off all of these things so that when the time came, when the moment was right, to place him in the right place at the right time, just so the nation of Israel could survive and move on to the next generation. Because the dream is exciting. The vision is exciting. The destination is exciting. But God had to prepare Joseph for the destination. God had to prepare him for what it meant, really, to sow seeds. to sow seeds for the future of Israel. And what that means for us is this, is sometimes God must put us through the fire to prepare us to harvest. Or in this case, before we can ever get to one at a time, maybe there are things inside of us that God has to take care of, God has to shift, God has to change so that we can start seeing people one at a time. What is God needing to do inside of you? Because it's not always easy sowing seeds. When you're sowing seeds, you're going to run into different situations. You're going to run into different perspectives. You're going to run into different things that may challenge you on what you think you believe and what you think you know. Sometimes sowing seeds is going to lead you to uncomfortable places. Sometimes sowing seeds is going to bring uncomfortable people into the building or into the different areas of your life and things like that are going to need us to sow seeds, to water, and so that God can harvest it. But that means we've got to learn how to be uncomfortable being comfortable. Wait, we got to get comfortable, but you know what I mean. And so I wonder, is it possible that God gives us a destination without telling us what the journey is? Is it possible then that when we think about one at a time, maybe it's also what God is wanting to do inside of us one at a time as well, so that we can be prepared to then focus in and zoom in and laser in on who God has placed in front of us? Because the thing that I love about God, or maybe I'm the most annoyed about God, is He loves giving us destinations without roadmaps. But realistically, could you imagine just for a moment if God gave Joseph this dream, oh, by the way, all of these other sheaves are going to bow down to you, but then guess what? Before we get to that, in your dream, you're going to get thrown into a pit. You're going to get sold into slavery, and it's going to get even better. You think that's the worst of it? No, you're going to move into this house. This woman's going to try and take advantage of you. You're going to run away. The Potiphar is going to believe his wife, and then you're going to go into prison. Oh, and it gets better. They're going to forget about you in prison, but then after a while, you'll get out. And then you're going to get to step into this destination. Do you think Joseph is signing up for that? How many of you are signing up to get thrown into a pit today? I don't know why the microphone is doing that. I don't think Joseph would have done God's call if he had known what it meant to be and follow God's call. And that's why I believe God does not give us all of the details, because truthfully, we cannot handle the details of what God wants to do in us. Because for us to get to the place where He's called us to be, that means we have to do some growing. And I don't know if you've ever done this or noticed this, but growing hurts. It doesn't feel good. And so that's why God does not give us a roadmap, because He is preparing us for His call on our lives. And that means He is preparing us where we are planted. Isn't it funny that there are many things that happen in our life that make us feel uncomfortable? And I don't know about y'all. Do we have any runners? And I'm not talking about like physically running. I mean, when there's problems, you're like, I'm ready to get out. I said at the beginning of the service, I used to think what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Now I'm saying what brings me pain, I want to get away from. Because realistically, what does society tell us? You shouldn't have to deal with pain. You shouldn't have to deal with issues. You shouldn't have to deal with these things. Just get out. That's what society tells us, and yet what God tells us is if you want to be in place where He's called us, and you want to be where He's called you to be, and you want to get to the destination, guess what? It has to hurt a little bit. You got to deal with a little bit of a struggle. And that's why I'm saying before we can get fully to one at a time, we have to let God work in us just as God worked in Joseph. Because sometimes God has to fix some things in us. And I use sometimes, but it's really all the time, right? And so we cannot be afraid of the growth. We cannot be afraid of the fire, so to speak, because fire burns away the impurities that keep us from accomplishing our mission and accomplishing our destination. And so we cannot be afraid of God burning away our imperfections and our impurities, but that also means that we have to learn to trust God in storms. See, the older I get, the more I realize I have a love-hate relationship with storms. I don't know about y'all. I love them because I know I'm going to get to come out of that, and God's going to move, and He's going to do amazing things, and it's going to be game-changing, and my life is never going to be the same because I'm going to learn to grow and understand God more. But I also know they hurt. I also know that in storms there's a lot of uncertainty, and yet God says, trust me in the storm. I know that for Joseph it was, this is the destination, but you need to trust me in the pit. You need to trust me in slavery. You need to trust me in the prison where it looks and it feels like they've locked away the key. Because you need to trust that my destination and my vision for your life is greater than anything you could ever imagine. But you have to stand up. And maybe before we can get to the them, we have to realize what God wants to do in us. And then we can think about others. So don't be afraid, church, of the journey. Because the journey leads us to being the men and women that God has called us to.